Eric, and today I'm joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Hey.
All right, very anticlimactic today from you. Really hoping for more. Well, you know.
You're really going to have to bring it next week.
Next week, you're really going to have to plan this one out. Give us something.
I did not today. So.
Oh, yeah, I was really hoping for like an Irish accent.
Oh,
for this.
shit. You want to try it again?
Yeah.
Too late.
I was trying to think of what an Irish greeting is, but I didn't know. So then I was like, hey.
Oh, you just got to talk like this, you know. It's just a little bit like that. Here we go.
I find
No, don't you know that? St. Patrick's Day is coming.
Are we going to get canceled for this?
I don't know.
I'm not getting canceled.
Yeah, I don't know.
I got canceled.
Rachel
sorry.
and I will continue on, but I don't want to.
It is. I'm like thinking like
I have a red beard. I can do it,
That's
okay?
true. Yep.
It's okay. It's the luck of the Irish.
my wife, comes from the McCabe family who are Irish, so somehow
My grandma, her heritage was Irish, so
isn't it like everybody? I feel like
Yeah.
is Irish
A little
around.
bit, yeah.
I got a little bit too.
Oh, you got a little Irish in you.
Yeah, especially around St. Patty's Day.
Yep. You just.
So,
Yeah.
this week everyone is Irish.
That's true.
Yep.
That is
Do you guys
true.
wear green on St. Patty's Day? Alex, do you?
I do wear green, yes. I always tried to be I was just obnoxious growing up. So I'd always be the person that would like have stealth green on, it's like my socks, or like people would have to search
So
for
people
it.
would
Or,
still
Wait,
pinch you.
your undies?
or my underwear.
Yeah.
I hope they're not searching.
Well, no, but like they'll come up because I remember being a child so long ago, but like there was a pressure to wear green, obviously, and if you didn't, you get pinched. That's just kind of how I grew up. So I would wear like a sock or like take a marker and mark up mine, or wear a sticker somewhere like randomly that people wouldn't see. They pinch me, and I would say, if you pinch me and I show you my green, I get to pinch you twice.
Oh,
yeah.
so that's
So-
how it worked. I wondered like if you waited to get pinched before you revealed it.
Yeah, that's
Typically.
not fun.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
You were in it for
I got pinched a
For
lot,
the
but I
double.
got
You got
double
revenge.
pinch,
oh
The
my
dual
goodness.
pinch. Ooh.
That sounds
and I had no friends. No wonder.
Oh.
I'm sorry. St. Patrick's Day is my son's birthday, so it's more of that anymore than St. Patrick's Day. I know when he was real little, he didn't want to wear green because it was his birthday, and he was like
I can do what I
he
want
was
on
like
my
in
birthday.
kindergarten or preschool or something like that, and he was like, "Well, it's my birthday. I don't have to wear green, right?" And I said, "Yeah, you're right. You don't have to. It's your birthday. We'll, but." I don't really. If I wear green, it's on accident because I don't really think about it. So, I'm not that festive, I guess.
Is that a thing for kids anymore? Like
That's
my
what I was
kids,
just
I don't
thinking.
think I
Yeah.
can't imagine my kids go to a public school. Like if you went up and pinched a kid for not wearing green, like
Oh, now, yeah.
Done.
Yeah.
where as the people say, they're too soft. The kids these days.
Yeah.
Too soft. They get
just change
pinched
it
on
to a
St. Patty's
hug.
Day.
Yeah.
If you're not wearing green, you're going to get
Well,
a
this
hug.
year, obviously, in the midst, maybe coronavirus will end forever the pinching on St. Patrick's Day.
Oh yeah, another benefit of the pandemic.
Oh, goodness.
No more pinching.
No more pinching because you have to stay.
Yeah.
Distance.
You'd have to have those long grabbers.
Oh, that's how.
Yeah. Are there any? Does anybody do food like corned beef, and cabbage?
I like to make
or-
corned beef and cabbage like once a year. I just enjoy it. I don't necessarily do it because of that, but my husband likes it.
Yeah, we're corned
I
beef
don't mind
cabbage.
it.
My mom at
That's
least
good.
was, and so she would make it, and just
You sound really
and prayers.
excited about
It's
it.
just thoughts and prayers for the people around me the next few days.
Oh,
Gosh.
Ew.
okay,
So-
wait. Okay, so we won't see you the next day.
Yeah.
So we're safe on
You guys are safe.
Wednesday.
You'll see me on that day because that will record our podcast. So
Yeah.
I'll make sure I don't have it for breakfast.
We sure learn a lot about you.
Eggs and corned beef.
I'll go
and
with
hash.
Lucky Charms.
Oh, okay.
Typical.
All right. Well, any other traditions that we're missing? I don't know of any. It's the green. It's the corned beef. I mean,
Is,
I
is there
Search
like
for the treasure? Anybody ever tried to search?
is this about your green underwear again?
No. Searching for the treasure. at the end of a rainbow.
Oh, okay. Like, I guess we could start like a tradition of like the Easter basket thing where you hide like a pot of gold for your kids or something with
Somebody
candy.
probably does that. Some
Shamrock
eggs.
shakes.
I know. Yeah, Shamrock shakes.
Shakes.
That's a big thing. That like if you like drinking liquid chemicals.
Yeah, I saw because Ben loves to get one like once a year, and it has like 36 tablespoons of sugar in one.
Wow.
Gosh,
So he's like, I'm just going for it
You
once.
know,
I'm like,
it'd
I
be
can't.
nice if they would release that and the McRib at the same time frame, so you could just make that one trip a year to McDonald's and be done.
Do it all together. And then is there St. Patrick's Day movies? There's some about like a scary
Usually
leprechaun.
they're like scary leprechaun
What's
movies.
that movie?
Leprechaun.
Leprechaun.
Is that what it's
I
called?
think it's just called Leprechaun.
Oh,
But they're old. Like, aren't those from the 80s or 90s?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't really watched any of the Leprechaun movies. I remember seeing the VHS like cover when I was a kid in the movie store, but I was too young to rent it.
All right.
The green beer, I think that's one thing
That is a thing.
that is very
That's
popular.
your celebration.
No, it's not mine personally. No.
Oh, yeah, but that's
And it,
something that
it is that a
People will
cultural
do.
thing. I think all of those types of celebrations and pubs and local
fish and chips.
Yeah, I just
fish
wonder
and
if that
chips.
stuff is it's not probably as popular. I guess they do outdoor, maybe beer gardens or something like that. People with social distance.
There's usually a parade. I remember, and they paint the big
yeah.
clover in I think downtown on a street. So that, I'm not super into it. I did have a prized possession as a child. This reminds me of my Thai Beanie Baby. I think the name was Aaron, so it was the green one with the
really?
shamrock.
That is too much of a coincidence.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, and I married her, not the Beanie Baby, but Aaron.
Oh,
God's providence right
Wow.
all right, there it is.
Well, what else can we say?
Well, I think that's it. Happy St. Patrick's Day in in about 4 or 5 days of when you're listening to this. So get yourself ready.
Get that green dye everything. Green eggs and ham today.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. All right, up next we got headlines. All right, our first headline comes from KETV.com. It says, "I wouldn't be here today without him. Former patient says Dr. Stothert saved his life." This story comes from a local story, obviously, here in Omaha. Our mayor's husband recently passed away. This has been a big headline around here the past few days. This article specifically is sharing some experiences from his patients who really cared for him as a doctor. He was found dead on his family's property recently, this past Friday. And the early speculation was that it was suicide, but, we don't want to spread any misinformation, and I don't believe it has been confirmed. But I think that's something that's, at least worth mentioning when it comes to healthcare workers and the stress that is put on them on a day-to-day basis.
And especially this last year, I know even for me, I had a friend who's in the healthcare industry that has been working very tirelessly over obviously the last year. And I think early there was a lot of, and I think there still is some appreciation now, but I think early in COVID, there was a lot of appreciation, a lot of like, let's do things for healthcare workers. Let's rally around them. But I think as with anything, people just kind of get tired of it, or if it's not in the forefront of our minds, or as cases are dropping, things like that, we can forget about all the stress that they went through. And then, it's even like anytime someone passes away, everyone wants to be at the funeral, and then we always want to encourage people, hey, you need to check in on these people after the fact, after the grieving happens, after, they actually have time to sit back, pause, and their lives slow down. And so I do think it's a reminder either way to remember our healthcare workers, to remember the people that have seen things over the last year, especially been called on in ways that they probably never imagined, and just the stress and the toll that it's taken on their lives over the last year. And so, and continue to thank them, continue to pray for them, and continue to be a resource for them as they now and we're not out of this, but as they continue to look back on, man, the hours they put in, the stress that put on their lives, their marriages, their bodies. So either way, hopefully it's a time to reflect on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's not just a person, it's their family too. And I just think about them as a family. Like, she's the mayor. Like, how much stress she probably went through this past year dealing with all the COVID stuff too, and being involved in that process. And just on their family, that would just be such a hard, stressful year when you're just right in the middle of it all the time. And it's not just the one person, it's the whole family that it's a big struggle for.
And being in healthcare or a healthcare provider, your patients are protected by HIPAA. So you as a healthcare worker are holding in a lot of information about people that you can't just talk to even your best friend about. Yeah. There's information and things where it's like you're holding that for somebody else, whether it's medical or therapy, and it takes its toll. It's very isolating. And then I just can't imagine Mayor Stothert, going through that. I wouldn't wish that on anyone privately, but to even be going through that publicly, where it's like she's getting talked about on a podcast or, their news stories. It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think healthcare workers in general facing so much adversity this year. And then, and just also we saw these cases of people who would just, pretty much disrespect what they're doing by denying that this was even an issue or pretending that, COVID wasn't real or whatever. And you think like how demoralizing that would have to be to come home every day and see this stuff and see the headlines of people acting that way when you have just, exerted all your physical and emotional energy trying to care for these patients and try to keep them alive. And then you watch them die every day. And, it's heart wrenching, and I just can't even imagine personally the toll that it must take on someone. Yeah.
And the timing is, there's never a good time, obviously, to lose someone, but when you're in politics and it's election season and all of that kind of stuff is happening, I'm just praying the best for our city. That unfortunately, sometimes a hope in a tragedy is that unity can arise and people can, see the humanity in the mayor, whether they agree with her or disagree, whether they're her opponents and they're like, hey, she's been running the city in a terrible way and that's why I'm running against her so I can fix that. I'm just hoping, for her sake, for our city's sake, that in some ways there's redemption. And so we'll continue to pray towards that end.
Absolutely.
All right, our next headline comes from CBSNews.com. This is actually breaking news, so we'd probably need a sound effect for that.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right
now
on Wednesday.
Listen.
Yeah, sorry. We're as always, we record this a couple days early. But this headline says, third stimulus check. How soon might you receive a $1,400 check? The House on Wednesday approved the final version of President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill, a legislative victory that will include a third round of stimulus checks for most Americans. The Senate approved the measure on Saturday. So it looks like, according to this article, by next weekend, a couple making less than $160,000 could receive $2,800 deposited in their checking account. So, I don't know. Wherever you fall on the political spectrum, I'm sure there are people who are desperate for some help. People have lost their jobs this year. Our economy, even small businesses are suffering. So the hope is that, you pump a little bit of money into the economy, that we'll see a little relief, but it seems, it's unprecedented in a lot of ways in our generation to see, this type of money coming through for us. And in some ways it seems like a lot, but, in other ways, if you lost your job, this isn't probably a whole lot. This is a nice maybe cushion to help you through, but it's something very valuable to people.
Yeah, I really do think it's such an interesting thing that everyone gets it. Like, I don't know, that's just so interesting to me that it's like they're not really just pinpointing people who, like, small businesses or people who've lost their jobs and stuff like that and then giving them the checks. It's like everyone is getting one, and that's just so interesting to me. I'm sure, you know, there's obviously a reason and obviously for the economy, to stimulate the economy. But I think it's just interesting because when you're giving money to people who may not necessarily need it as much, it's kind of like, what are they doing with, you know, they might not even be putting that back into the economy because, I mean, they might not to use it. So it's just an interesting thing.
Yeah. People are going to be buying stocks or putting it into savings or different things like that. But I do think, you know, if you are going to, you know, spend it, there are some ways that you can do that can help stimulate your local economy, and I think that's by shopping local businesses, local restaurants, things like that. Two big sighs there from Jess and Alex.
I think for me, I mean, taking politics out of it, just from a therapist, so like putting my counselor hat on real quick, and it kind of ties into.
Do we have to pay for this?
No, you're
okay.
fine.
Okay, good.
I'll bill you later. No, you're good. But it kind of ties into the two headlines kind of tie in a little bit together for me, because reflecting back on 2020 is heavy mentally. People went through a lot, not just mentally, but financially. And so it doesn't matter where you're at on the political side, like the money's coming. Yeah. And just knowing now, I think people are even in a harder spot than they were 6 or 10 months ago. Maybe you had a cushion then, and now everything's gone, and you're looking back, you're doing your taxes, and you're like, there's nothing in my savings, or I don't have anything left to give because this was supposed to be done in 2020. So I think there's this financial and a mental aspect that's really, really hard right now. And whether we agree with it or not, I think that it's helpful, and I'm seeing people that it's going to help. And so I'm just looking at it like that, of like, I feel like the mental financial crisis is ramped up now. I feel like there's more going on now, especially processing as you look back than maybe there was 6 months ago.
And what an opportunity for you, if you're one of these people that, you know, like Rachel, you know, you speculate that some people maybe aren't in need of this. Like, pray about it. Where could you use this money to bless someone who actually is in need, you know, or, you know, I mean, even if you don't give all of it to somebody or give all of it to this cause, but there's still opportunities for you to do something with this money that you wouldn't normally be able to do. Yeah. And I think that's the positive way to look at this. I mean, you can, whether put politics aside, you're getting this, you know, this check is coming to you. I don't know if you can deny it or not. So, I mean, think of the positive ways that you could use it.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I honestly don't have a ton of input because I feel like it's come so fast. So like the money, and you're like, where's it come from? Like, what's the long term? Like the skeptic in me asks all those questions. I know there was like a in the Christian world, our subculture, there's a song that's been popular called "The Blessing," and there's like a meme out there that's like,
since the first stimulus.
Yeah, who's gonna pay for that? And then it's like, and your family for 1,000 generations.
Your children and their children and their children.
And there's probably like the funny why that's funny is because it is like a possibility, obviously. Like we don't, and so but I also try not to spend too much of my time thinking about our national debt and all of that, because I would never sleep, and and it's difficult. But then there is a personal responsibility that like you said, Eric, I think we should pray about it.
Yeah,
it's definitely helping people that are in very, very desperate situations. It's it's helped my family in some situations lately, and then there's sad parts of it. Like I was sharing when we were preparing for this, like had to look for a car because I got in a car accident in December, and that stunk. And then as I was looking for it, one of my dad's got some friends that own, used car dealerships, and there's also people that are gouging, when these kinds of things happen. They're like, hey, well, tax season's coming and people are getting stimuluses. So the price of cars is going up, and you're like,
your
well,
dad's
maybe,
friend told you that.
yeah, he told me that.
Yes,
so
yes.
he,
Well,
yeah,
just
he
to
was
clarify,
helping. He was just
he's not
giving me that
yeah.
information. He wasn't trying to rip me off.
Yes.
He was being kind and saying, hey, here's just the reality
Yeah.
of the market right now. Every year around tax season, cars just bump up a couple $1,000s. And so it's just like, well, the people that are buying those cars probably can't afford it. And it's just all of this yucky stuff behind when there's an influx. But then it's like maybe those used cars people haven't been able to sell as many cars this year because people haven't been able to even buy them or needed to buy them. And so that was just an interesting tidbit that I learned in the middle of it, though. So
yeah. And I'm sure, the history will tell how this affects us. I'm sure there's economists who could give you a breakdown or a theory or help explain it to us better. And none of us here claim to be any of that. But yeah, it's happening, and there you go.
I will give you, if you do not want it, I will give you my Cash App. Okay, just DM me, Venmo, whatever.
Yeah, feel free to just
goodness.
bless someone.
Yep, bless us.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that does it for headlines. There's nothing else. There's nothing else to talk about. There's no other news. It's just
that's it.
Those are the only
There's
things.
no other
We
news
covered
in the
it.
world.
Dun dun dun. Good job, Eric.
Up next, we're going to be talking about boycotts. Boycotts. They're pretty popular with some people, some groups of people. There's been quite a history of different kinds of boycotts. Some slightly successful, some more successful than others, but I would say majority of them fairly unsuccessful. We as Christians are probably some of the most guilty of, starting boycotts, or at least jumping on those bandwagons for better or for worse. There's a long history of them. I know I've experienced different boycotts my entire life. I remember being a child, and there was, they boycotted Ninja Turtles. And the Batman movie, I remember someone was like, we can't watch this Batman movie, the one with Michael Keaton, because it was dark all the time. And so there was no sun in it, which was supposedly symbolism for, there was no God in it, I guess. I don't know. Disneyland, Procter & Gamble. Do you remember that boycott, anybody? Or was that just me being a child of the 80s? There was all this belief that they make like toothpaste and everything, that their logo was referencing the Antichrist, and so a lot of Christians stopped buying Procter & Gamble products. Those are just some of my personal history, but Alex, I think you've got your professor hat on over there, and you're ready to give us a little more of a history lesson on boycotts.
I'm always studying boycotts.
No, it isn't.
That's why we asked you to speak today.
You knew.
Thank you for being
I'm
here.
so informative.
Didn't even have to find a guest.
I often do like to geek out, and when you hear a word like boycott, where did that come from? Mm-hmm. Like, how did that even become popular?
Are there girl cots?
Right.
Because
what you got against
cancel
cots?
culture, we understand what cancel means. It's like an actual word, but boycott is named, apparently. It was made popular in Ireland. So that's good because we talked about that a little bit earlier. Yeah. So we didn't even plan that. There you go. Free. But there was a guy by the name of Charles Cunningham Boycott who was a British estate manager. And so he was, selling stuff for too much or charging his tenants too much money. And so the people boycotted. They decided, hey, we're not going to pay you that kind of money and all that kind of stuff. And they wanted to help him understand, hey, you're charging way too much for land and all this kind of stuff and these evictions that you're sending us. So they all kind of got together against this guy, and they had their first official boycott, and so from there on, they've been used in economic, political, social relations. Obviously, these kinds of things happened before this name, boycott, was given. But that's kind of a little bit of the history lesson as I looked in the internet, on the internet from Britannica. Speaking of, you guys ever have one of those growing up? I remember the commercials, the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Didn't you get like a monthly subscription or something like that?
Yeah.
Where they'd update it every month?
And I just remember, I had a friend whose dad had one in his library, and it was just like this giant. I mean,
Yeah.
It looked like Dr. Pagenkamper's office.
My parents had one, and being homeschooled, that was one of my tasks during school at one point, was to utilize that for information and papers. That has nothing to do with boycotts, but
you wanted to boycott it though.
Yeah.
Maybe.
looking back, yes, I'm questioning why I didn't.
But now we have the internet, so I guess some things
Null
go
and
away.
void.
What are some of the most famous and notable boycotts in the past that you can think of? Any that you've remembered fondly or not fondly?
I think one, well, I don't know if this is considered a boycott, but one more recently is like when MasterCard and Visa and Discover like blocked their like people from buying anything off of Pornhub.
Oh yeah, they took away the processing.
Yeah, so I kind of would consider that a boycott because they're boycotting, the companies are boycotting basically that website. And I think that was such a cool thing to see. And just so recently too, that was one that I noticed.
I think a few of the famous ones, again, not from my brain, but from the internet, but as I was researching, was obviously the Montgomery bus boycott. So we've got Rosa Parks, who decided, I'm not going to go sit in the back of a bus. And so from that point on, after being treated in a racist manner, they decided to boycott the bus system. And that obviously led to some pretty big social change. It was a 13-month protest, a 13-month boycott. So that led to some, obviously, there's unrest in our country, all that, but that's one of those famous ones. I know the United States, 1980, I was not alive for this, but I have read. Also was not alive for the Rosa Parks one either.
Oh, okay. Thanks for clarifying.
But we boycotted the Summer Olympics. So that was in Russia at that time. And so I know that the U.S. didn't go to the Olympic Games that year, which is a pretty big deal for a country, especially
That is a big deal.
The U.S. to boycott that. I know those of you who
Cold War was something else.
Yeah, it was. SeaWorld, another one.
SeaWorld.
After Blackfish came out, people boycotted SeaWorld.
I remember watching that documentary.
Yeah, they
No,
wanted
that
Free
was
Willy.
that was Free Willy. That wasn't a documentary.
Yeah.
Blackfish is a documentary.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Free Willy.
I do remember. I'll never forget when Free Willy jumped over.
Yeah,
It was just a moment in my
Yep.
childhood.
No,
Have you seen Free Willy, Rachel?
Yeah.
Okay.
When he jumps over.
That's all we remember from the movie. It's just the
Michael
whale
Jackson
jumps out of the
and
water.
the Michael Jackson
Michael
song
Jackson
starts.
in the music
Yeah.
video.
I'm going to have to listen to that later, like volume 10.
Okay.
It's a good one. Anyways.
So those are a few of the, I think, more notable ones that maybe not totally the SeaWorld one, but the other ones that we've seen some pretty big change historically happen as a result of those. And so all three very different, kinds of boycotts, but led to results.
I think the Blackfish one is bigger than you think.
Is
That
it?
was a big deal. And I tweeted SeaWorld. Okay.
Mm.
I'd have to look back.
Oh.
It's in my
Joined in.
Twitter feed.
People are going to start researching your Twitter
Yeah,
tweets
that's
now.
fine. Alex has already told my handle, I think, a couple weeks ago. But, and they tweeted me back and they were like, this is not true. And I mean, kind of like back and forth.
Wow.
But I've never like really gotten into beef with anybody but SeaWorld
You fought.
on my Twitter. But I was like, I haven't gone back to SeaWorld. That shook me.
Yeah.
But I think the one that I think of is just like the attempts of, hey, we're going to boycott this. So like I think of like Target, Starbucks, Netflix, where there's just been these attempts where there's certain people. And I have friends that don't go to Target, don't go to Starbucks, cancel their Netflix account.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're still thriving.
Right.
You still buy Burberry because there was the Burberry one
Yeah,
where,
right. I
where
mean,
they
just no big
decided
deal.
to change their brand and then burn all of their stuff, because they want to keep their
I
brand
remember
value
hearing
up
about
when
that.
they rebranded.
I guess I think a lot more of the boycotts is what I will call them, the BUI-COTS, like Chick-fil-A, when, all of a sudden a chicken sandwich stood for something that probably shouldn't stand for, but I mean, I think in some ways it almost became a hateful thing, in a lot of ways, seeing these lines of people buying chicken sandwiches, even though a lot of people took it as, hey, we're standing up for our, religious beliefs. It's easy for the culture to see that a different way. Or the Goya thing, because the Goya Foods brand, where I think it was their president met with Donald Trump, and people were like, oh, boycott Goya. And then you saw a lot of conservatives buying lots of Goya to support them. So it goes both ways too. So, it's one of those things. And sometimes that sort of stuff kind of just seems, I don't want to be reductive, but it seems a little silly, and it seems kind of petty sometimes, just to be like, it's not as big, like something where you can't compare a chicken sandwich to Rosa Parks. But yet I think that there's this temptation for people to feel like it's the same,
And I think like what you're talking about, like buying goods and services, I think that how I understand it is that's where they have their power, right? It's not like I can make a decision like in legislature. With my vote or something like that, but it's like on a day-to-day basis, my power is in my spending power or what I subscribe to or something like that. So whether it makes sense to us or not, it's like somebody's conviction played out through.
Right.
Yeah. It's literally like money.
Which there are
dollars.
It has been effective in certain cases.
Yeah.
I think people have been able to make it known that, they're not going to spend money certain places, and companies react. But other times, you look at Nike when they came out with the Colin Kaepernick ad. That was one of those things that was really divisive for some people. And you got people burning their Nikes on social media and, cursing the name of Nike. But again, that was Nike knew that was going to happen. And they sold a lot more Nikes because they knew that some people were going to get upset, and, they're going to freak out on the internet. That's some of that stuff's plotted out. It's kind of, I guess you'd say, baked into the cake in some ways. So, yeah. But I think that even like we talked about yesterday last week with cancel culture, sometimes we don't realize how we're being manipulated.
I think part of it is these do bleed into one another, cancel culture and boycotts. I think sometimes a boycott starts because of cancel culture. So somebody was canceled, and so because, Netflix canceled, I don't even remember her name, the gal we talked about last week, some people wanted to boycott Netflix. So sometimes it's a result, like you cancel a person, and then our response is to boycott you. Or
you're talking about Disney Plus.
Disney Plus. My
Gina
apologies.
Corona.
So I think they bleed into one another a lot, but I think they are different because it seems like cancel culture as a whole is towards a person, and boycotts seem like it's more towards a company or a system, rather than just like a single person. And so they do, have a little bit of a dance together, but I think there's a difference and sometimes companies will be the ones that cancel a person, or maybe it's someone they're sponsoring, and then as a reaction, culture begins to boycott against a company or their decisions or whatever. So
that can destroy a small business.
Yeah,
that can wipe somebody off the map.
I was just thinking about like the power, like different boycotts are gonna have different levels of impact based on. Like Amazon, like. How are you ever even going to impact that? Like, they have such a huge business. They're so powerful. They have so much money. Like, how are you ever you're boycotting. How is that ever going to impact that company? But if it was like a smaller business, like that would just, completely destroy them. So it's different.
Yeah, I think of cake, companies, for example, that's been one that's happened because of, a cake company, and those have come up in lawsuits. Their willingness to make a wedding cake for a couple that's homosexual or not. And so sometimes, companies have been destroyed because of, hey, we're not going to make this, or some companies have thrived. And it's just so interesting to see who rallies around, some of those, because there's some companies like because they took a stand for something and because they were boycotted, the other group, on the other side of an aisle or on the other side of an issue comes in and sometimes like does a boycott in a positive way to like fight off a boycott.
Right.
So it's just so interesting to see how those dynamics, come into play and change in all those situations.
So what do we think it looks like in Christian culture? I mean, we've named some of them that we've seen specifically where Christians have jumped on those bandwagons. And I think a lot of times these start with good intentions. But it's also one of those things where I think as a Christian, you kind of have to have this self-awareness that we're not of this world. Like that's what we're taught. So the idea that we want to boycott something and try to have this big movement, isn't always maybe as effective because that's almost like part of our DNA as a Christian. We just are, there's always going to be something else that's not, that's not going to align with our beliefs. But when, what do Christians, how do we make those decisions? What's a wise choice? When do we, join in on those certain types of boycotts?
I think a lot of times it's just you see a company or someone who is doing something or supporting something that is not biblical or something that you don't believe or agree with. And I think it can go in two different ways. One way could be just like you just don't like that and you just want that company to just, be destroyed. You don't think that's right. So why do we want, we want to keep them from business or whatever. And I think also another way is, okay, I am spending my money and supporting this company that is supporting this thing that's not biblical. And so you kind of maybe draw a line back to yourself and saying, well, am I supporting this thing? Am I supporting this sin that I believe is not right or not okay? And so I think there's kind of a couple of different mindsets that go into this. And I don't know. I can see.
And that logic I think can toy with a lot of people, but I mean, at some point, maybe the Amish got it right. Because, I mean, where do you draw the line? Because, I mean, it's kind of like if you're a vegan, well, then do you buy a car that has leather seats? Probably not. But then do you know, what car do you buy? Because the car manufacturers are still using leather seats. So you're supporting, you just go into this rabbit hole and it never ends. So at what point can we disassociate ourselves and feel okay about that? I mean, I'm sure it's on a personal basis, but still.
I think you're right that it's on a personal basis. I think part of our relationship with Christ is we want to stand up for what we think is right. I mean, and there is to some degree, I think people feel it differently, the need to respond and to take a stand. That's defending your faith. And it looks different to different people based on theology, religion, upbringing, culture. I think there's a lot of things. Yeah. I also think another thing that plays into it is, for parents or families, there's pressure, but there's also setting an example. So it's am I just going to say something or am I going to do it? I think for me anyways, as I look at people doing this, maybe it's very simple and it's silly and whimsical, but I think that is also kind of slapping the face of somebody that's done a lot of research and feels really convicted. Yeah. And so for me, it's how are you letting your convictions play out? And, what message are you wanting to send to your kids and to your family? To some degree, I'm not saying it's right, but I think people are doing it with good or right intentions based on a conviction. Yeah. And it's obviously oftentimes very misconstrued in our culture. I think it hurts sometimes more, sometimes whatever you want to say, more than it helps bridge that gap. Because to me, it's very simple, love God, love others. So through that lens, how do I look at that? Am I going to go to Starbucks? Am I going to follow this trend or that? But to me, as I'm trying to wrap my mind around people, it's based on deep convictions.
And I think Christians have been, why we are where we are is because in a lot of Mark referred to it on Sunday, and I've read the book too, and it's by Rodney Stark, The Rise of Christianity, and it talks a lot about the original roots of the church and how a lot of what they did was rejecting what culture was inviting them to do. So, in the Roman Empire and things like that, there was a lot of pressure to get rid of, daughters and to get rid of, kids, and, to either just leave them out in the wild, or they can, sell them into slavery, all those kinds of things. And so the Christians said, no, we're not going to do this. And this is how orphanages, began. It's why we look at most, healthcare systems, and there's a cross on them, or they began in some kind of religious way. Why a lot of education, when people were saying, hey, women shouldn't be educated, or this minority group shouldn't be educated, the church, the people of God have stepped in to see these things that culture is saying aren't right, and step in and say, hey, we're offering another way that is good. And I think that's where a lot of times it can be a problem, is that we want to impose our views without like proposing a better way.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things that the early church did very well, was not just say, this is all wrong, we're just fighting against culture, but they're proposing a better way, a new way, a way that Jesus was inviting people into. And I think where we can get it wrong is we like to impose our thoughts on a culture that we're told is not of Christ.
Yeah.
But we don't propose a better way to people. And so I think that's where we get ourselves in a lot of trouble with that. So
yeah, I think there's so many situations that could be applied to. Of, man, we cannot expect people in this world who don't know Jesus to live out a life that we are called to live out. And so then it's, how do you find that balance of kind of rejecting culture and rejecting the world and the worldly things that are happening, but also loving the people who are participating in those things and not rejecting them, because how would you expect anyone to follow the things that you believe when they don't know God and don't know Jesus? It's just always that weird balance, I feel like, especially with a topic like this.
Yeah, for sure.
I think too, you can dig. I mean, we could find in any company or any organization, you could do enough digging to justify how things aren't ethical, how things aren't. And honestly, part of me likes to stay ignorant to some of that stuff, because if God like breaks my heart for it, whether it's coffee, like honestly, how coffee's made, and fair trade's been a big thing that's come up lately. Then it's like, man, I've got to pay extra for people to actually get fair wages, and I would rather not pay extra. Or my clothing, one of those things that God's convicted me of in some ways is like, do you even know where your clothes are from? And a practice I've even taken is like looking at the tag of my shirt and seeing what country it's from, and just praying for people in that country. And that's a way that God has like used, to encourage me to pray and to even consider those things. But the flip side of that is like, man, if I find out that these things are being made in unethical ways, even sugar, something that simple that I consume on a daily basis, a lot of the things that we consume, unfortunately, on a daily basis, even unethical.
Even if you look at like recently there's been a lot of stories about meat packing plants and the way the conditions that these workers are in, and the fact that they're wearing diapers on the production line in America. This is in America, where they're going through things because of our, dependency on meat. And it's like, there are all these things, and a lot of them hit close to home because they cross over so much with Christians, because we're humans, right? Like we're all humans, whether you're Christian or not, we all share that part of humanity. And so it's hard sometimes to draw those lines, because there's always the next thing. Like we can boycott something today, but then what's the next boycott, and do we get behind that? And then at what point are we just exhausted, because how do we even keep track of what things to boycott?
And a lot of times, we just have convictions of convenience. And so like, we'll be convicted by something as long as it's not inconvenient for my wallet. Like I was saying, like, hey, not to buy this certain kind of coffee, or not to buy like stuff that wasn't fair trade. That's going to cost you in the long run, or maybe you're going to be able to buy way less of something. And so a lot of times those convictions are just like, if it's convenient, then I'll boycott it or not participate.
Well, in different people groups or people who make different life decisions. I mean, the Target thing was focused around trans people being able to use the bathroom, And again, that's something that may not obviously align with your Christian beliefs, but at some point it's easier for you to get behind that boycott because you don't have any skin in the game. Maybe you don't have a relationship with a person going through those issues, or you don't understand what they're, facing. And not to say there's any justification there, but a lot of times it's just easier to boycott the thing that you don't have any direct connection to, because you could just go, okay, well, I don't believe in this, and so let's move on. But you don't take the time to at least understand where people are and why they're in those positions.
And like you're saying, I mean, maybe even tied to your the Target example, maybe you don't even shop at Target, so it doesn't change or impact or affect your life other than saying, I'm boycotting Target, and you don't go there.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm even thinking, we kind of talked about this before, but like, what are Christians for instead of what we're against? And like, Eric, you brought up a few things that I feel like aren't just things that Christians are fighting against, but that our culture is, and America is fighting for things to be made fair, like for people to be paid well for what they're making and for their work. And like, that's not just a Christian thing. That's like, I've seen a lot of people that are in, my generation and culture that aren't Christians that are fighting for that too. And so those are cool opportunities, I feel like, where we could come alongside that and be like, yeah, I totally agree with that. And I'm a Christian and I believe that, this is the right thing to do, and gives us an opportunity to connect with people who aren't believers and fight together for something that we believe.
Yeah, I'm deeply convinced that, and I've probably said this a million times, but the way we treat creation reflects how we feel about its creator. And so the way we're treating people made in the image of God, which all of us were, reflects back towards God, how we feel about him, how we feel about his plan, how we feel about how he designed things in a broken world. I think another part of why Christian culture gets so sucked into this is there's a couple guys, maybe they'll be guests one day on our podcast, that really love this stuff, and they've grown popular because of it. There's a pastor named Greg Locke and another guy named Joshua Ferenstein, who are guys that have, pastors, people in ministry, and, they get on the Starbucks thing and they're like, hey, Starbucks took Christianity out of it because they came up with a red cup. It's like they never had a nativity scene on there, and this isn't a Christian company, and everything becomes about they're trying to take, remove Jesus from somewhere Jesus was never even a part of. And then we throw fits and we get mad, but then their audience is built up on social media on a platform that they're using to the benefit that they don't agree with half the stuff that the platform Facebook does. And so there's this song and dance that they do. And again, they're letting their convictions only, live out when it's convenient for them.
Yeah.
And so.
And this kind of goes back to what you're saying earlier, but we see, oh, Jesus isn't there, let's just destroy it. Instead of, oh, Jesus isn't there, how can we bring Jesus into this? Like, how can we help these people know Jesus? And
yeah, Jesus isn't there. There's lots of people that are made in his image and reflecting his image. So well, Jesus is there.
And I think there's always a temptation to go searching for the darkness. Even as Christians, we want to point out things where it's like, why do we waste our time with that? We've been given something so great and so powerful and beautiful, and we've been given this new life through Christ, and yet we want to spend our time searching for the devil, pretty much. Like, we want to find Satan in everything and point it out to everybody and make this big deal about it. And it's like, why are we not sharing this gift that we have? Instead, we're just trying to drag other people down and make them feel shame for what they don't have yet. Which, I mean, I don't think that's how any of us would have gotten to salvation, is by just completely being told how bad we were,
Yeah.
How do we, I mean, maybe we can talk about it personally as well, but how do you personally decide whether you're going to join something like this or you're going to get on the bandwagon? Do you have like a list of, check boxes and things like that? Or do you just stay away?
I don't think I've ever boycotted anything, except I guess I haven't been to SeaWorld, but that's not like active to me. Like I haven't done anything necessarily active, but I can't say that I disagree with boycotting. When I look at how, even Alex, your first example of the Montgomery bus system, like that has made history, and that has made a huge impact, and it was such an injustice. That was so wrong. And it makes me think, like, would anything have changed or changed so quickly if something like that hadn't happened? But I think that for me, why I feel a little cynical about boycotts in general, separate from issues of humanity and injustice, is it's so flippant. It's like, I mean, we've said it. Who are we canceling today? Who are we boycotting now? And that's where I have a little cynicism, where it's like, I can't keep up. Like, I don't have time.
I think part of that goes to the fact that boycotts and revolutions and things like that used to be a radical thing. When you talk about, you know, the Montgomery bus situation, that was a radical thing. Now, boycotts are a dime a dozen. Outrage is a dime a dozen. You barely have time to figure out which one's happening before we move on to the next one. And so at that point, nobody has time to internalize it. Nobody has time to understand it.
Anyone can be a part of it.
Anybody can be a part of it by a tweet or a post on Facebook, and nobody has time to actually make a change. So, I mean, that's why probably there is some success in, you know, cancel your Netflix subscription. Okay, whatever. They're not gonna get enough people to really make a difference. I mean, they would have to do something that across the board just everyone was canceling, you know, because it's such a big company. It's like the Amazon thing. But these are happening so fast. I think, you know, it's kind of like casting your pearls before the swine. Like we have a responsibility to try to lead the culture in a way that is in a positive way, in a Christ-filled way. But when we're just constantly jumping on bandwagons because someone else said we should, then we're wasting our energy, and we're not really helping anyone.
Yeah,
making a difference.
And I think when you talk about like the Netflix thing too, it's like, yeah, there's not going to be a difference made. So really, when you think about it, it's like, are you really personally convicted and feel like, man, every time I get on Netflix or think about, you know, this, I really feel convicted and feel like this is something I shouldn't be doing? Then yes, like do that. Like I totally am like for that. But yeah, I think you just have to realize, okay, this isn't going to make a difference, but for me personally, this is what I need to do. And
yeah, and I didn't mean to downplay that from a personal perspective. I think if you're like, this isn't, I don't agree with this,
right,
cancel it. But you know what? You probably don't need to post about it. But if a friend comes to you and says, hey, have you seen this show on Netflix? You can take that time to go, oh no, I don't subscribe to that. Why? Okay, well, let me explain why I don't.
Right.
And that's the time to do that. But it's like, just to jump on this bandwagon because you think you're starting a revolution, which is going to be gone by the end of the week. You know, it just, what good does that do?
Yeah, I think, and it takes time. I would say, you know, maybe it's a boycott. You brought up Colin Kaepernick. I think sometimes I was trying to think of an example of a boycott that's really moved the needle recently, and he started one and took a lot of heat for it. And I think our culture, you know, even in the Black Lives Matter movement, separating the organization, but just an empathy toward Black lives and bringing an awareness to social injustices, all of those types of things. The awareness has grown, you know, and he was and I think that's the difficult part. It wasn't convenient for Colin at all. And he believed in it deep enough that he was willing to risk a career, you know, and then people want to take shots. Oh, he didn't really have a good career anyway, you know, all that kind of stuff. And people want to look at someone's weakness. But if you're convicted about something that much, then you need to write it out. You know, you don't just need to, when people, you're going to take heat for it. Obviously in the Montgomery, you know, one, then there was real consequences. You weren't able to get to work for, imagine being an Olympic athlete and like your entire world went towards that moment. And because your country made that decision, you lost out on it. It costs a lot of people, you know, to boycott. And so I think a lot of times the things we find ourselves in really cost us not much, or it's convenient, or it's in vogue. And so I think it's going to cost people a lot more inside of those things. I know for me personally, there's been a few companies that, you know, I've done business with that I've said, hey, I'm going to take my business elsewhere. And I don't make it a big deal. I don't like call people. I don't, say this is why, but I feel like, hey, the Lord's, and part of where I'm at on my journey in my sanctification process, hey, I just don't want to contribute to, the things that they're doing or the things that they're overtly standing for that I don't agree with. But I never once in my position have I said, I'm gonna put that out there. I've had individual conversations with people about, why I've made those decisions, and they weren't convenient because, I had to make a lot of changes when you maybe if it's someone you bank with, or if it's a cell phone company, or your mortgage lender, whatever it might be, you have to start to count the cost of, is this worth it? And so I've found myself in situations where I've, done that. But I would say there's boycotts that have happened, maybe that I wasn't a part of, but that have, educated me. And I've learned a lot from, so.
Yeah, for sure. And I think generations to come will be, benefit from boycotts that have been successful, the ones that have mattered, the ones that and I think that kind of goes into deciphering which ones you're going to get behind. I mean, we've talked about different things from, Chick-fil-A to Target to things like, Colin Kaepernick and people boycotting police violence. And I don't know how you make those decisions personally, but I think that sometimes if you look at it from a perspective of how is this going to affect, as the joke was earlier, my children and their children, because we can look back now in history and see those boycotts that did matter. Speaking of kids, how do you think this impacts our children when you are raising kids and they see, oh, why doesn't mom and dad do this, or why aren't they participating in this anymore? Why don't they go to Target anymore? What message are we sending to them?
I'm a big proponent of not answering any question because I said so to your kids.
Yes, I was just thinking that.
I knew you were. I just wanted to say it first.
Yes,
but
so true.
I
Preach,
think
Alex.
that's just one of those. It's not helpful, and if you can't articulate why, and maybe there's not always a right. There's an age appropriate level, I would say, to share the why, and you can share more and more why as your kids mature. But I think setting up that for your entire kid's life because I said so is just not very helpful, because I think it's not going to lead them towards life, towards discovering an answer, towards having a conviction, and then they're just going to develop convictions that are very feeble because I don't know. Why don't you guys go to Chick-fil-A? Why don't you guys go to, I don't know, my parents said we couldn't, and then they find out, man, the chicken's so good, or Target's got the dollar spot. What have I been missing?
Right.
And it's because of the I've never used the potty at Target in my entire life, So, I mean, I did because I worked there.
Why, so it's like, well, why not?
And so I think that, that's a big part of if there are things that will make decisions. And there's movies that our kids aren't going to watch. There's, my kid's not getting maybe a cell phone at a certain time, and that's not quite boycott, but it's not just because mom and dad said so. It's not me being authoritative, but me giving them some reason for some of those things.
And I think as children move into adolescence and get older, listen to them and help them to critically think and ask questions. Why have the conversation with them, and don't just say because I said so, and validate them where that is and teach them where it is, because I think, there's this, we could just brush that off, but I think it's empowering, and we're helping raise the next generation. We want critical thinkers that are going to engage well with issues like this and look them head on. And
I think what will be hard about that is you are giving permission for them to disagree with you. I think that's another big thing, is like there will be things like there's things that between me and my parents that we don't necessarily agree on, and but that's okay. Like we are seeing things from different perspectives, and so I think that's going to be hard too, because you are giving your children permission to think through that on their own and then come to their own conclusion, and that might not line up with yours.
One angle I always take with my kids is our motivations behind things. And so, and I think this goes at least into my personal philosophy about boycotts, and that's, is this something I'm doing because I'm angry at someone or because I love someone? And I think so many times when it comes to Christian boycotts, it's because we're angry at someone or we're hateful towards a people group. And so with my kids, it's like, hey, are you angry with this person or do you love them? And so this is what's going to guide our decisions through life. Like what is our, that's what should always guide you. Do you have their best interests for this person in mind? I know you don't know who they are. I know you don't know them from anyone else. I know that they don't mean anything to you right now, but you know, are you mad at them or do you love them? You know, and I think that's one of those things where that's what has to guide us. That's what has to go into our decision making, and we have to pass that on to our kids.
And I think that, I spent years obviously working with middle school students as a middle school pastor and high school students. And, you know, as kids would reach adolescence so much, one of the tragic things is, you know, they'd say, hey, I want to be baptized. Why? Well, because my parents were, or my parent, and it's great of your parents to have raised you there, but there becomes a time, and we have to start thinking of how are we stewarding that time in our kids' lives before they are contributing to society, and where they have to take ownership of their own decisions and take ownership of their own, you know, salvation, their own trust in Jesus. And unfortunately, even in the church, sometimes it's just replicated by, why do we go to church? If your kids don't even know why you go to church, it's just because it's something we do, then maybe you're missing the mark. Because if we start to teach our kids, I want my kids to be good at soccer, so I'll sign them up for soccer and a coach will coach them. I want my kids to be good at dance, I'll sign them up for dance and a coach will coach them. I want my kids to be good at God, so I'll just take them to Sunday school and they'll figure it out. You know, and that's, we take that same mindset into even our kids' faith in Jesus. And then we wonder why it crumbles. It's because it wasn't built on a very good foundation where they could ask you tough questions. And some of the questions that my kids ask me, I don't know. And it freaks me out because I think I know a lot about Scripture. And I'm like, let's figure this out together. And so
that's good.
Even if it's a boycott or whatever that kids are doing, Dad, what's TikTok? I never thought my kindergartner would ask me that question. And so, well, we don't like that. You know, the girls are doing this dance, and I like listen to it. I'm like, okay, babe. Well, we don't like that song. Here's why. And had to have that conversation, and she already knew the dance, and so it's interesting.
You mentioned Jesus. Would he
love him?
Would he do Would he boycott? Would he do the boycotts?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jess. It's all forever going to be an interesting question.
Yeah, right?
Would Jesus
because
have an iPhone?
I think that's a dangerous question to answer. It is.
Yeah,
it is. It is, and I don't think we should.
It's always the question we go to on every topic, though.
I know, right?
What would
he boycott?
Jesus do?
What would Jesus do? What does the Bible tell us? He doesn't say, don't take a little sip of Starbucks. He doesn't say don't go to the dollar section at Target. But what principles does he teach us? It goes back to, basic summary: love God, love others. So that I think it's more the lens of than what he would do. But feel free to Jesus juke beyond that if you feel. But I don't know. That for me is like we're just putting another label on what people have already done in some instances of Jesus wouldn't do this or that. So that's kind of a slippery slope, in my opinion. And probably Carl, pagan campers.
Oh, wow.
We're just throwing
We can't speak for Jesus, but we can speak for Carl. Carl.
Love to ask him.
I know you're not listening, but I'll tell you to listen to this part. Yeah, I think it is did you have something you were going to say, Rachel?
No, you go for it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting
Maybe I'm
going
to get canceled. I'm okay with that. I stand by it.
Obviously, Jesus boycotted sin. He wasn't a big fan of sin, but I think...
It's classic Jesus juke right there.
Yeah, there you go. Jesus boycotted sin.
You got me. The one thing.
Dang it. He didn't sin in his whole life. That's how serious he was about boycotting it. But I think I'm reminded of stories of how Jesus interacted with people. And in Luke 7, there's a story of a tax collector that Jesus hangs out with. He actually calls him to follow him. And his name's Matthew, but he was called Levi at that time. And people were freaking out, like, because the tax collector was not a good dude. He was like taking advantage of people. He was just known for somebody that would be not good, not religious. He was corrupt. And like the guy invited Jesus to dinner, and Jesus went to his house and he made him dinner. I'm guessing that dinner was made and that house was built with some money that he got in a pretty corrupt way. Yeah. And yet Jesus goes to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes, it says, they started grumbling at Jesus, saying, "What do you do eating with tax collectors and sinners?" And Jesus said to them, "It's not those who are well that need a physician, but those who are sick. Yeah. And I've come to call the righteous. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." And so either way, I think Jesus would be in the middle of mess, in the middle of engaging, never in the middle of like just severing relationships. I think he would be, and for me, honestly, like a lot of my convictions that I grew up with and heard about, not even knowing why, like a lot of my convictions of Scripture as I've studied it have become even more tightly grabbed. I've they're more solid than ever. But in my process of sanctification and Jesus working on my heart, the more I think my posture towards people has lightened up. And so I used to want to cancel people because they didn't line up with a biblical lifestyle that I saw that was very clear and all of that. But then the more and more I realized the depth of my sin, the more and more I realized I'm broken in almost every single way that the people that I get mad at or am I told are my enemies are broken. The more my posture is, yes, these things are true. Scripture is true, and it is infallible and all of those things. But it's coming in with messy people that are broken people. And while I was still a sinner, Christ died for me. And so I think it's just important to remember. I do, for the sake of boycotts, I think one that I saw modeled really well from a Christian was a few years ago, a guy named Kirk Franklin. He Makes Me Want to Stomp. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that song. And he made probably a lot of people mad because he redid Awesome God. That song, that classic song.
He was also on one of Kanye's tracks that made people mad too. Yeah.
So Kirk Franklin, he is a gospel artist, Christian artist. And I remember a couple of years ago, and as we were preparing for this, it reminded me of that. He, at the 2016 Dove Awards, he got up at the end of it in his speech, at that time, he was saying they wanted to pray for some families of black victims who had died at the hands of, white officers. And then at that time, I think it was when the Dallas shooting happened, and he also prayed for officer who was white and got, killed by a black man. And that was part of his acceptance speech. And the Dove Awards, and when they put it out, they just removed it. That was not part of it. So he had a conversation with him. He's like, that's not okay. Like, that's not good. You can't just remove that because you want to avoid controversy. And so he had that conversation. They're like, we're not going to do it again. We're cool. We'll fix it. And then it happened again, I think, when he accepted the award in 2019 at the Dove Awards. And so then he came on, and he's like, hey, I'm not going to this thing again. Wow. And here's why. I talked to these people, and I think there's a biblical model of having those conversations, especially when there's Christians in Matthew 18. And then they promised to not do it again. And then even in his conversation where he's like, hey, guys, I'm not going on the Dove Awards, he said, I'm not trying to, this is my decision. And what I'm not trying to tell you to do is everyone boycott it. But this is my decision, and here's why. And he laid out some of that. And he's like, I'm not. And then he also said, but I want to be a part of the solution. So he's not like, I'm canceling them forever. Yeah. But and I think sometimes we do that as Christians. He's like, no, I believe that redemption can happen, and I want to be a part of the redemption. And I think that's what was happening in that story with Jesus too, is he's like, hey, there's obviously not good things about this, but I'm going to sit with this person. I want to be a part of the redemption. I'm not going to accept their sin, but I want to be a part of the redemptive narrative inside of their life. And so if you believe anybody's too far for redemption, any company, any whatever, I think that's a dangerous spot to be in.
For sure.
I think Carl would agree.
Good. Oh, that's good. That's good.
Let's check with him.
Well, hopefully this allows us to all follow our convictions a little better and maybe understand why those convictions are there, what they mean. Thanks everybody for having this conversation today, and hopefully nobody boycotts this podcast afterwards. But we do appreciate you all listening. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can do so on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. We'd love to hear from you. Until then, we'll talk to you later.